This video was intended to inform and educate the public.
3 Tacoma police officers were found not guilty in the death of Manuel Ellis, a black man who died in police custody in 2020.
Welcome back to the Junkyard News channel. And in today's video, we're going to discuss a case out of Washington. If I was to ask you to name one job in the United States where you can directly cause or even remotely assist somebody in taking a dirt nap when they didn't want to, and actually get paid to do it, millions of dollars, what profession would you guess would allow that? If you said law enforcement and policing in America, you would be right. Today we're going to be talking about a case in which a man walking home with donuts never made it home. And the officers that were involved, after around 4 years of being on paid leave and receiving in salary and benefits for those 4 years about $1.5 million, were ultimately acquitted by a local jury, even though the coroner ruled this gentleman's passing a homicide. Not only that, now that the U.S. government, the feds, are getting involved to relook at this case, because again, not guilty on the state level, but now the U.S. district attorney is going to review and look for any civil rights violations that occurred. And if they think they have a case on the federal level could still and may be brought against these 3 police officers. Now you may be thinking, what case are we talking about?
The officers were accused of choking and shocking Ellis, holding him face down while he told them he could not breathe. Defense attorneys argued that Ellis died from a lethal amount of drugs in his system and not from excessive force used by the officers.
We are talking about the case in which we had the passing of Manuel Ellis at the hands of 3 Tacoma Department police officers. Now, witnesses had described what led up to all this as the officers instigating everything. Washington state lawmakers are expected to be considering a proposal to prohibit police from hog-tying suspects now 4 years after Mr. Ellis, a 33-year-old man, passed face down with his hands and feet cuffed together behind him in a case that became a touchstone for justice demonstrators in the Pacific Northwest. The restraint technique has long drawn concern due to the risk of suffocation, and while many cities and counties have banned it, others still allow its use. In the last 4 years, states across the U.S. have rushed to pass sweeping reforms prompted by racial injustice protests, and especially the passing of Mr. Floyd and others at the hands of law enforcement. Few have banned prone restraints, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. California prohibited law enforcement way back in 2021 from using techniques that would involve a substantial risk of positional asphyxiation, in which the body's position hinders the ability to breathe. That same year, Minnesota banned correctional officers from using prone restraints unless deadly force was justified. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice has recommended against the practice since at least 1995 to avoid deaths in custody, and many local jurisdictions do bar it. Now, these 3 Washington state police officers who were cleared of criminal charges in the 2020 passing of Mr. Ellis, again, a man who was shocked, beaten, and restrained face down on a sidewalk with his hands bound together with his feet as he pleaded for breath, will now each receive $500,000 to walk away from the department. This says to the public that these are excellent officers, and it's a shame Tacoma is losing them, said the attorney for one of the officers. Now, news agencies do report that this $500,000 walk-away money for these 3 officers comes in the wake of the U.S. Attorney's Office opening an independent review of the passing of Mr. Ellis. Now, the jury did acquit back in December following a trial that lasted more than 2 months. Now, the city released copies of the voluntary separation agreements with the 3 officers as Police Chief Avery Moore announced findings that none violated any use of force policies that were in effect back in March of 2020. Collins was found to have violated a policy concerning courtesy. Now, since the incident, the chief did acknowledge that the use of force policy at that time failed to serve the best interests of the public and the police department. So they have since updated it. Now, the gist of the story about Mr. Ellis is this. Ellis, 33, was walking home with donuts from 7-Eleven in Tacoma, Washington, about 30 miles south of Seattle, when he passed by a patrol car that was stopped at a red light, with Collins and Burbank inside. Now, the officers claimed they saw Ellis try to open a door of a passing car at an intersection, and he became aggressive when they tried to question him about it. Collins testified that Ellis demonstrated superhuman strength by lifting Collins off the ground and throwing him through the air. But 3 witnesses did testify that they saw no such thing. After what appeared to be a brief conversation between Ellis and 2 of the officers that were in the car, one in the passenger seat, the officer in the passenger seat threw open his door, knocking Ellis down. The witnesses, one of whom yelled for the officers to stop attacking Ellis, and a doorbell surveillance camera captured video of parts of the encounter. The video showed Ellis with his hands up in a surrender position as Burbank shot a taser at his chest, and Collins wrapped his arm around his neck from behind. Rankine was one of many officers who responded. Ellis was already in handcuffs, face down, when he arrived. Rankine knelt on his upper back. Video showed Ellis addressing the officers as sir while telling them he couldn't breathe. One officer is heard responding, "Shut the blank up, man." Now, the Ellis family did settle a federal wrongful death lawsuit against Pierce County, which is home to Tacoma, for $4 million last year. So the family got paid. They're not the only ones. Again, once the officers were acquitted, they pretty much walked out after 4 years on paid administrative leave, netting in about $1.5 million. And now, as soon as the U.S. attorney on the federal level comes out and says, we're going to look at this case ourselves on a federal level, these 3 officers sign a separation agreement in which the city's going to hand them another $500,000. So you pretty much, at the worst, assist in the passing of this man, and you're going to get paid $2 million. Just sickens me. So now the Western Washington U.S. Attorney's Office is opening an independent review into the case surrounding the passing of Manuel Ellis, weeks after 3 Tacoma police officers were acquitted by a state court and jury for their respective roles last month. This will operate as a review of evidence in the state's case with the goal of determining whether the officers violated any civil rights matters. If the passing reveals violations of federal crime statutes, the Justice Department will take appropriate action. It was a sympathetic jury that found Tacoma officers Christopher Burbank, Matthew Collins, and Timothy Rankine not guilty on murder and manslaughter charges in late December last year. This came after an intense and emotional 10-week trial where the defense asserted that Ellis's passing at the hands of officers was largely the fault of an enlarged heart and substances in his system. Now, prosecutors pointed to how officers allegedly beat, tased, and choked Mr. Ellis. Videos taken by witnesses show Ellis telling officers he couldn't breathe while they had him hog-tied, handcuffed, and pressed to the ground. And the Pierce County medical examiner did later rule that Ellis died of oxygen deprivation. So there you have it. Sympathetic jury lets these 3 officers off. Now the U.S. District Attorney on a federal level is going to look at it for possible federal civil rights violations and possible charges to come. But the main thing I take from this, these 3 officers each, not only did you have 4 years on paid administrative leave, which gained you about $1.5 million, but now the city is going to hand them, for them to resign, say, resign yourselves, you 3 officers resign and leave the department, and we're going to hand you $500,000 each. You're good officers. They're found not guilty. But because the U.S. attorneys now is going to get involved, you know what, maybe you should resign and we'll make it worth your while. But you're still good officers. Thank you again for watching this latest version of the Junkyard News. Appreciate the views and support and the thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and leave a comment because it does help the video. Thanks again, and we're going to see you in the next video.